welcome to another episode of the Change Troubleshooter podcast. And today I have the lovely Zoe Cohen with me, who describes herself as, well, actually I describe Zoe as master coach, mother, and definitely activist. So welcome, Zoe. Lovely to see you again.
Oh, thanks, Nina. Nice to see you too.
And today we're going to talk about what does an activist look like? And the reason we've picked that title is that as I've been going through all this learning and being curious about what's happening in the world of sustainability, being an activist was something that I thought wasn't me and was out of my reach. And when I was introduced to Zoe, one of the things that the person who introduced me to her said, oh, she's an activist. She's in fact one of those Extinction Rebellion activists, but don't worry, she's not what you think. And I just thought that was quite amazing. It was an amazing introduction. And I did laugh to the person who did that and said, oh, what do you mean by that? And he said, I think you'll find that you're actually quite similar. And then when I met you, Zoe, you seem like a normal person to me, just a person who cares.
Yeah.
So you weren't tied to a tree. Maybe that was something we should have been looking for. You weren't carrying around a big banner, and you didn't scare me. And I think these are some of the things, aren't they, that we sort of have in our heads about what an activist looks like, what an activist is going to be. And to start us off, I looked up the definition of an activist, which I think is really interesting, just between the three, Oxford English, Cambridge, and Merriam-Webster. There's an intensity that builds maybe on how brave they think they are in describing this. So you're either a person who campaigns to bring about change, or believes strongly and takes part in activities, or supports strong actions such as public protests. So how would you describe what an activist is, Zoe?
Well, I'd probably go back a step, Nina, and just say I recently, for an online session on Marine myself, just looked up the official definition of activism, which sounds like a ridiculous thing for me to do, given I've been at it for quite some time, but just to use as a kind of banner for the event. And it said something like that, basically along the lines of, you know, taking action to bring about change, or something really that simple. And of course I thought, of course it is. It really, that, and so for someone who's always been, I've not always been, well, I wouldn't say myself as always having been an activist by a long shot, but I've always been someone who's, you know, makes stuff happen in life, in work, in whatever, you know, I do things, I'm a doer. And so I looked at that definition and I thought, well, that's kind of obvious, because the opposite is being passive. And, you know, I've never been someone who's, since I've been little, I've never been someone who kind of go through life, you're a passive receiver of the world. Well, you know, I don't think we need to be passive. So for me, it is just literally not being a passive recipient of what the world throws at us, really. And you know, it's that simple to me.
And that is so important to recognise, isn't it? Because even I have had these moments. And I think if you are around the same age as us, then these images will really resonate. And for those of you only listening on the podcast and not watching the video, then there are images up from Greenpeace, Swampy, Martin Luther King, the suffragettes, and then of course Black Lives Matter, HS2, which is very local to us at the moment, and Greta. And they're all images that really do make you think, yeah, these are activists. They are people who are putting themselves in danger, you know, tying themselves to trees, or hanging themselves from an oil rig, or putting themselves in the way of big whaling ships. They're people who are willing to put themselves at personal risk to make sure that somebody is taking notice of what's going on. And I suppose that's the activist picture I always had in my head, which I don't put myself in that bracket. But of course, this is just one tiny bit of activism, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you know, seeing those the Greenpeace whaling ship pictures and the climbing the oil rig, etc. I mean, that I remember when we talked before, Nina and I was totally inspired, and yeah, really thought that the Greenpeace activists, when I was a teenager, that, you know, the Rainbow Warrior and the Greenpeace activists doing that stuff, I thought they were incredible. I thought they were a different category of person from me, and, you know, I wouldn't ever be able to do things like that. And I wasn't, I thought they were amazing and completely inspired by them from quite a young age. And yeah, actually, I mean, even in those pictures, and I know some people listening to podcasts can't see the pictures, but you've got Greta standing up with a little school strike for climate sign, and you've got people in our HS2 process just holding up banners, and you've got some young women at Black Lives Matter just holding up little cards. You know, actually activism comes in all shapes and sizes, and, you know, it's only a very few number of people who do things as scary as tying themselves to oil rigs, etc. You know, actually, a lot of it is pretty mundane campaigning work. You know, it's behind the scenes, it's emailing, it's phoning people, it's talking to people, it's trying to build up connections in local community groups, it's you know, organising events, training. I mean, there's a whole load of stuff which you think, oh, it's pretty mundane organising, really, but that's what a lot of what's behind activism. And of course, anything from writing to your MP to signing a petition, even though they're incredibly low level, and many people might do them and maybe some people don't do them. I know lots of people don't write to their MPs, but even those things are on the spectrum of activism. So, you know, it starts from as low level as signing a petition right up to, you know, the incredible people who are still underground at Euston Square Gardens protesting against HS2. There's still 4 people who've been underground for nearly a month now. You know, right through to that level of sacrifice, and of course the sacrifice of protesters and earth protectors all around the world, particularly Indigenous people who don't get enough mention, who are literally doing it on the front line for their lives and their livelihoods, whereas, you know, we're in a different position, a lot of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I learned as part of my studying recently was how essential activists are to our society, which again really made me think, because I think sometimes we are led to believe that activists are working against society, but actually for us to remain civil society, there is a thing called the rule of law. I personally hadn't even heard of the rule of law. So the rule of law has a real special mention for the role of reformers. Essential people, activists, people who get involved, making sure that they are the check and balance for the people that we elect to government. And I think that has never been more in our focus, that we may elect people to government in good faith.
Yeah.
And those people in government may try and do their work in good faith, but it doesn't always turn out the way we thought it was going to turn out. And if we didn't have reformers, activists, people who were willing to be the check and balance of what was going on, we would have a very different society, wouldn't we?
I mean, you're so right, you're spot on, Nina, and I think it's a very interesting kind of social process that goes on, and from my perspective, I think it's influenced by the current political narrative and some of the right-wing and mainstream media, but that I think a lot of people are encouraged currently to think of activists as extremists, even if it's things like school strikers or you know, doing some sort of completely peaceful protest, but actually, you know, you, me, and the other, you know, 30 million women in this country, or how many there are, we wouldn't have the vote if it wasn't for the suffragettes and the suffragists. And, you know, Black people wouldn't have any of the rights that they've currently got in the US, and we would LGBT, gay marriage. You know, there's so much in society that people now take for granted, that we can vote, that we can do this and we can do that. But actually, all of those things came from social struggles, from activism movements. So it's totally essential to society. But there's something about the current political narrative, but also something about maybe our culture, particularly in this country now. But when you look back at them, no one would say, those nasty suffragettes, how dare they try and get votes for women? I mean, no one would say that now. People would just honour what they did. So it's very, very interesting. And I think you make a really good point about the rule of law and the right to peaceful protest. I'm pretty sure it's a human right. It's actually it's a human right enshrined in global law, that we have a right to peaceful protest, and as part of our human rights. Which of course is right. In any democratic society, we have to be able to peacefully protest. And also, what I think people, and I get this on my sort of online activism stuff, I get people saying, oh, they broke the law of the land or whatever. And you think, well, hang on a minute, the law of the land is not an immutable thing. It changes over time. If you think of post-war US, it was illegal for black people to ride on the same part of the bus as white people, and what a nonsense that is. And obviously in Nazi Germany, it was illegal to keep Jews away from the Nazi authorities, and it was legal to exterminate Jews. So, and as someone with a Jewish background myself, that's completely, utterly, obviously offensive and mad. So these things have all been laws. It doesn't mean the law of the land is right at the time. It's a movable thing that's negotiated through democratic process and peaceful protest. So every law is not right just because it's in place at the time. And as Greta rightly says, there's no rules for keeping fossil fuels in the ground, so we have to change the rules.
Yeah, and I think what this conversation hopefully is doing in people's minds is just turning those cogs a little bit to say, actually, we create those rules. Those rules are there for us because we believe they're right for society at that time. And like you say, they're movable. They're not set in stone. If something isn't right anymore, then we challenge it and we change it. And I think we've lost sight of that, and we've lost sight of our role in that.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And I think, who would go back to the time when this country, when the only people who could vote was a certain class of men who were landowners?
Yeah.
Who the heck think that's the right thing to do? So without activism, these things don't change. So, well, yeah, and some would say things haven't necessarily moved on that much, but that's another debate. We could have a whole other podcast about land ownership in this country. That is another podcast.
Oh, yeah. So you yourself, Zoe, you've put yourself in the position of putting yourself at personal risk. And I love the story that you tell there. So I'm going to let you tell this story without interruption.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you, Nina. Yeah, so I guess it depends how far back we go, but I'll try and keep it brief. So I've been passionate about the environment and social inequality and related issues, and looking after nature and looking after the future generations' interests and so on for a long time. And I've done all sorts of stuff. I've done thousands and thousands of volunteer hours in community organisations, like doing the sort of polite community activism. Some people would call it activism, I suppose. I wouldn't really now, but organising events, doing talks, all sorts of stuff, and even chairing a community energy company, which was great and took huge effort. But actually, it was all a drop in the ocean. And back in late 2018, when the IPCC report came out, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 1.5 degrees report that said, hey guys, this is really bad, and not only do we need to stay below 2 degrees, which is what the Paris Agreement said, but we really need to try and keep to 1.5 degrees to avoid utter catastrophe. And the headline was, we've got 12 years to save the planet, and that was a bit of a misleading headline, but anyway, won't go there for now. But I'd always known and cared about climate change, but I'd put too much trust in the system. I put too much trust. You know, I remember when the Paris Agreement was signed, 2015, 2016. I remember seeing it on the news, and I cried with relief. You know, I cried with relief that, oh my God, they're going to do something. They're going to do something. And I put my trust in the system that they would take the action that was needed. And 2018 was that year when we had a big heat wave and a huge drought. As an allotment of quite a number of years, you know, our crops were dying and we had to water them daily to keep them alive, and that was quite scary when you realise it's really hard to grow food, particularly when the climate's shifting. So all of these things kind of added up to a sense of, okay, they haven't got this, have they? They really, really haven't got this. It felt very scary and very, very a huge additional wake-up moment. And I'd already considered myself as quite an awake person, but actually it was a huge additional wake-up. And shortly after that, I became aware of Extinction Rebellion. A friend just sent me the name, the 2 words, and I thought, what's that? I've never heard of it. Saw the video of the initial actions in London back in November 2018 of 5,000 people blocking the bridges in London. I was blown away, just completely blown away, Nina. I feel emotional just talking about it. I watched it, and you can it's still on YouTube now. It's the most joyous thing. People all ages, you know, elderly people sitting in little chairs that they brought with them, people all ages, backgrounds, finally acting like the truth was real, finally behaving like it was an emergency and stopping the traffic. And my whole body, my whole being was like, oh my God, thank goodness, someone's finally doing it. And I just stood and cried. I cried whilst I watched it. And I had to find out more, So I watched a talk by Gail Brodbrook, the founder of Extinction Rebellion, called Heading for Extinction on YouTube. It's the original version, it's still on there. And again, cried and committed from watching that talk, which was back in December 2018, that I would get arrested, that I would be prepared to take action that would risk arrest and get arrested. Because the story and the rationale and the logic around Extinction Rebellion is that social movements and social change, significant big social change, only really happens with mass civil disobedience. And the pictures you showed before with you know, Martin Luther, Greta's now obviously, but also the suffragettes and others like Gandhi, etc., which we didn't talk about, and others through history, show that really. So I'm a pretty rational person. I've got quite a bit of science background, and I'm quite geeky on the science. But there's the social science that also completely convinced me. It was like, well, of course things don't change unless you actually do this. And the evidence from the social science research shows it as well. So it was the science and the emotion that made me commit. So that picture on the left is not only of an enormous number of policemen and policewomen, but a few of us on a roadblock in Parliament Square in April 2019 at the first major rebellion that XR did, where we brought parts of London to a standstill for 10 days. And so you can see, well, you can't see because I'm too tiny, but I'm on a roadblock blocking part of Parliament Square, and you can see there's a hell of a lot more police than there are of us. We were a tiny number manning this roadblock, and there were roadblocks all around the rest of Parliament Square. And it was day 4, I think, day 3 of the rebellion. And the second picture is me on the ground with my colleagues, and this huge wave of police reading us our rights, telling us about Section 14 and whatever, and then we get arrested. So that was April. It was terrifying. I found it really terrifying. I'd never done anything like that before, but I knew it was the right thing to do at the right time, and it had to be done. And I'm incredibly proud that I had the guts to do it. Incredibly proud, and incredibly proud of everyone else in the movement. And then I went to get arrested again in October 2019. The picture is on the right-hand side is me outside London Magistrates Court, because when you get arrested, you have to go to court locally to where the arrest was, which is terribly inconvenient when you live in the Northwest. It costs a lot of money and time and effort to keep going back to London. But anyway, so I had to go to a first hearing in August to plead guilty or not guilty, and I pleaded not guilty because believe that I wasn't guilty of anything in the eyes of justice, as it were. All I did was sit on the ground and to prevent mass death and harm in the future. And then I went to trial in October 2019 and had a horrific trial. It was like about 9 hours in court, literally for sitting on the road peacefully. Didn't harm anyone, didn't harm a hair on anyone's body, but it took 9 hours in court, and it cost me a few £100. And I got a 9-month conditional discharge. So I got a criminal record for a period of time. But that's me standing outside in my kind of work clothes and boots, not my rebel clothes, my kind of work professional clothes, outside the court after a very long day, after having been found guilty of breaking Section 14 of the Public Order Act, which has now gone off my criminal record because it's been cleared because it's a spent offence. I got rearrested in October, but that wasn't pursued. It was dropped because it was out of time. And so, yeah, my story is one of a very, very ordinary middle-aged mum deciding that she had absolutely no choice but to do this.
And that comes from these two very personal pictures. And again, I really urge you, if you're only listening, just to pick up the video footage that goes alongside the podcast. There's a gorgeous picture of Zoe in a meadow with some wildflowers, and I don't even know what these pictures are called. Are they like fetus pictures? So not the wrong person to be describing them. Not one of my own.
Yeah, it's my daughter's 20-week scan picture.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit of my daughter's 20-week scan picture, because she's nearly 18. She would go crazy if I showed a picture of her now. She was like, I wouldn't get mummy points for that. I probably won't get mummy points for this, but I think I've got permission. But yeah, so me at age 3 in a field on Anglesey on holiday, with a bunch of wildflowers, weeds, dandelion, you can see buttercups, daisies, whatever, all sorts of wildflowers, which nowadays I wouldn't pick because there aren't many of them left. But I've just felt close to nature since I was little. Plants and animals, I think most children do. Most little ones feel close to nature. It's just the socialization process and the dualistic modern mindset that takes us away from it, unless of course we've been grown up in urban areas, inner cities, where we just don't have much nature to have connection with, and that's such a sad loss. And I didn't grow up in the countryside, but I had the benefit of going to Anglesey for most family holidays, so I got lots of connection with green and nature there. And yeah, my daughter's 20-week scan picture, I think I hope that there's lots of mums and dads listening to this podcast, because when we think about our kids, parental love is just so incredibly strong, and it drives you to do a lot of things, and actually we can channel it to do the right thing, or be on the right side of history here, and boy, there's never a better time to do it really.
And I think that is a message that hits home with a lot of people, that if you've got children, what the hell are you doing if you're not taking this a bit more seriously? Because people like me who don't have children will probably come out of this pretty unscathed. But if you've got kids, then you should really be fearing for what world is going to exist when they are around. And of course, that ability to vision that is very difficult, and we get all these things put on TV and amazing films made, but it would seem that people don't really believe it.
Yeah, and I kind of agree and partly disagree with what you just said in Nina. I think I talk to lots and lots of people about the climate and ecological crisis, and I think there's a tendency for adults, even younger adults, some younger adults, to feel like if they haven't got kids, or it's not an issue, or if they have got kids, it's what the kids have to worry about, not what us grown-ups now have to worry about, because it's so far in the future. That's categorically inaccurate, really. Whether you live in a flood zone, or depending on the part of the world that you live in, many people in the global south are already suffering and dying from drought, extreme weather events, the conflict that's exacerbated by climate change, etc. But even in this country, the worsening effects are worsening. And one of the many things that are really crucial in the science that isn't shared publicly and people aren't educated on, just as we've seen with the pandemic, is people don't understand exponential change. In fact, politicians don't understand exponential change. And that's how natural systems work. When they get worse, they tend to get worse quicker, and the worsening accelerates. So that's what happens with the R number with the pandemic, but the same happens with climate change and with climate breakdown. So whether it's ice melt in the Arctic or whether it's heating and the effects of global heating, they get worse quicker, they accelerate. So actually thinking that we're okay because we might have another 20, 30, 40 years to live, but it's not, we don't have kids, or it's not for us to worry about, is really factually wrong. The American Scientific Centre, NOAA, which I don't remember what it stands for, it's the American institute that studies oceanic and atmospheric science, but I can't think what the name stands for. They published last year, I think it was last year, some of their latest science predicting when we're going to have ice-free Arctic summers, which doesn't maybe sound like a big deal if you're not familiar with that stuff, and that's totally fine because lots of people aren't. But when there's no ice in the Arctic, it means the Earth loses its protective white covering at the pole, at the North Pole, which usually in the past has reflected a lot of the sun's energy back out to space. So when we have a virtually ice-free summer, which they're now saying, scientists were predicting it for sort of 2070 or something like that, which is far enough for most human brains to not worry about, even though we should worry about it. But they're now predicting it's likely to be 2034, which is in 13 years' time. And I think you and me and most people listening to this will think they're probably still alive in 13 years. And ice-free Arctic summers are a really big deal, because it means that suddenly there'll be that much more global heating, energy from the sun getting absorbed by the dark sea surface, and it will rapidly accelerate global heating and the impacts of it. So it couldn't be bigger and it couldn't be more urgent, but all of these key messages are just not getting through to people, which kind of brings full circle as why we need activists to get the message across.
Yeah, and it is, well, you've scared me enough in there. It is really difficult. And for somebody who works in change, you know, that's my whole career, I understand the change lag, which I get. It's very hard, I think, most of the time for me to get corporate clients to understand the change lag, that you have to do something now and you won't actually see the impact of that change for a number of years. This is magnified when we talk about what's happening to the climate. And I think we need much more education on that lag. Why, when you say even something now, we were talking about that might be 20, 30 years away is now 13 years away, where that has come from and why we should all be really scared about that, because something that is now 13 years away could easily become 8 years away, could easily become 5 years away, because we are not doing the things that we should have done way back in the 60s and 70s when these things were first mentioned. When if we had done some of the changes then, we would be seeing positive benefit now, but we didn't. And now that system change needs to be stronger.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And some of the reasons we didn't are, well, there's many reasons we didn't take action, but one of the big reasons we didn't is because the fossil fuel companies like Exxon, Chevron, Total, Shell, BP, they knew what was happening. They knew. They had very, very clever scientists working for them. And back in the 70s and early 80s, there's well-documented evidence that Exxon, for example, their scientists predicted more or less exactly what was happening. And they predicted that around now, we'd be at around 1.1 degrees of global average heating, and that the weather systems, climate systems would be getting to a very obvious place. It would be very obvious that change would be happening, but they thought that it wouldn't get obvious till about now. And they predicted it back in the early 80s when I was like 10, 11. They predicted it so well and so accurately. And they took that to the management, and the management decided to cover it up, and then spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds, all of the fossil fuel companies, lobbying against climate action. So that is a big part of why we're here. I mention that because, you know, we can't, when I mention that, it kind of comes full loop with the whole activist passive, because if we're not active, we're passive. And unfortunately, the world is not full of people who want to do the right thing. Actually, no, I don't agree. Most people do want to do the right thing, but there are small numbers of people with a lot of power who are not trying to do the right thing in everyone's interest. They're trying to do the right thing for themselves and for their particular interests. And, you know, that's leading to ecocide and genocide on Earth right now and in the future. So
I'm glad you brought that point up, because again, I think most people know that lobbying has become such a powerful tool for especially corporates or people in power to use. And we don't see that as activism. And that is activism. That is them being activists for what they believe in. And that has become increasingly powerful over the last 30 years, something that was never even spoken about. And then we got a tiny insight into it. But really, we still don't know what goes on when lobbyists get into the heads of the people that we have elected to make decisions on our behalf. And this comes back to the rule of law, doesn't it? If you have only one side very aggressively pushing what they believe in and nothing coming from the other side, then look at what happens. And we don't take enough time to balance that equation for ourselves. That there are people every single day spending a huge amount of money fighting for what they want to retain. And on the other side of that, there are few people who put themselves at personal risk with little money to try and balance that equation. And what we've all got to think about is that okay? Is that actually what we want? Or could we actually even things up a bit? We might not have the financial funding that the lobbyists have, but we definitely have a lot more power, and we have a lot more power when we come together to do this. And I think now going on to, I've put a slide up about Extinction Rebellion, which I will honestly say, when this took to our screens, when we saw what was happening on the news and started to hear about Extinction Rebellion, I was thinking, ooh, that's a step up from Greenpeace. It seems a little bit scary, you know, amazing that people want to be seen and heard in that way. But did I think that was something that I would probably get involved in? Probably not. I thought maybe I was a bit mainstream for that, even though other people would disagree with that. And just going to one talk that you've given, Zoe, and some research I've done for myself, what I've realised is I couldn't have been more wrong about what this organisation is actually about and the people who are in it. And I want everybody, if they only take one thing away from this podcast, just to take a look themselves at this organisation. And I think the one thing that you feel overwhelmingly is love. So that, and really reminded me actually, when I was at school with a number of daughters of mums who were part of the CND protests. And it really reminded me of going right back to that time. And I used to go to their houses and feel all the peace and love. And I used to think it was quite funny and, you know, almost like, oh, wow, these people think they can save the world by love. And I did not think for 1 minute that was what XR are about. But it absolutely is. It's just love then with a message saying, find this courage within you to be noticed more than anything. Because if we're not noticed, we are silent. And like we've said before, there are an awful lot of people on the other side of this argument who are not silent.
Yes, you've put that so beautifully, Nina. I couldn't have put that better myself. It is a movement which is totally based on love. Hundreds of thousands of people and thousands across the world in 70 plus countries doing this. The vast majority of them aren't paid a penny. Most of them, like me, are complete volunteers, and we're doing it for love, because there is no other greater motivation. It's quite astonishing what a fairly small number of people on a shoestring of money can do when they're motivated by love. Love of the planet, love of other people, love of humans they've never met across the world, love of the next generation, love of those unborn, love of other species, love of the biosphere and the fact that we're on this incredible planet and there's no other livable planet we can get to, love of justice, love of ourselves. There's so much love, and it is astonishing, and it comes in so many shapes and forms. I'm endlessly inspired by people in the movement and the creative and beautiful things they do. XR folk around, so it's always a minority of people who get arrested, and all of that is enabled by a huge number of other people. You need a lot of support and back office and creativity and spokespeople and all sorts of stuff going on. So it's there are many people in XR who support the movement in a whole range of ways, as well as those people who are really willing to do things that risk arrest. It's a very diverse and incredible movement, and of course there are other movements people can belong to as well. But my views haven't changed, that we need enormous social and structural change to have a chance of giving our kids a reasonable future, and we're not going to make that happen without large-scale civil disobedience. It's not going to happen without it. And I don't say that as a sort of, I just like doing this stuff. I would love to just get on with the rest of my life. I'd love, I could just carry on doing my coaching work as a coach. I could carry on spending more time with my family. I could spend more time on my own. I could chill. I could do, but I can't do that because I have to do this. And I would dearly love more people to join us, because we need more people. We desperately need more people to hear this call and to think, okay, I'm just an ordinary person like them. I can do this, because it's not scary and it's not weird. It's what people have done throughout history to create change.
Absolutely. And we'll put the links on how people can explore and maybe go to a meeting or two to find out for themselves. But at a time when we all need to feel that we are part of something and we belong somewhere, I can wholeheartedly say that you'll probably get that from an Extinction Rebellion session, which has, surprised me quite a lot, actually. So going full circle now, what does an activist look like? Well, an activist is all of us. It genuinely is all of us. There isn't somebody who couldn't be an activist.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I did a talk for XR only yesterday evening for a different part of the country, and had 27 lovely people on this talk on Zoom, and they were from all ages, from early 20s to, I would say, mid 80s, all backgrounds, faiths, creeds, different orientation, different ethnic minorities, a whole beautiful range of humanity. And that's what we need to do. We need to recognise we're all part of the same human family and take action accordingly.
Yeah, and we've got some 5 easy ways that people could get involved in activism, that maybe even people are doing them without realising, which is another part of what I've been going through. I probably didn't realise that I was more of an activist than I thought. Obviously, the change troubleshooter. So is activism and the things that I've been trying to do. The things that I've been trying to do in the corporate world definitely count, although sometimes it just feels like it's not heard, I guess. And what I have learned by joining in and being inspired by others, which is number one on our list here, is that you also put yourself in a group of people who are thinking the same as you, which is something that I've really been quite astonished by recently, by putting myself in different groups, being curious about what they're doing and inviting sort of feedback and giving contribution in a different way. I've realized that when I'm around the right people, what I'm doing seems to make sense. And it's made me really think about, well, have I been around people who aren't the people that I should be around? And of course, with the work I do, that is, you know, there's two sides of change, isn't there? If you, as everyone always says about me, if you're in an organization, it means that something has gone wrong, which I always think is quite negative, but I guess that's how people see it. So the reaction you get from people is very different. Whereas when you're within a group of people who accept something has gone wrong, and we're not talking about that, that's not the issue, what went wrong. What we're talking about is the positive work that we can do to change things moving forward. The response is very different. And I have found that, well, it's absolutely made my lockdown, if I'm honest. So I would really encourage others to do that, because from a personal perspective, it has helped me enormously. And that runs into number two, which is look at what's happening in your local community, because some of this, and even meeting you, Zoe, came from me doing that. And for you yourself, a lot of your work starts here in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've done is brilliant, Nina, the way you kind of you've taken it upon yourself to just make those connections and be curious and find out what's going on. And if only more people would do that, it'd be brilliant. Yeah, I'm a pretty big picture person, as you know, as you've got to know me a bit. So I do things from my activism stretches from, you know, the local level where I live, to the borough level, to the UK level, to the international level. So I'm not very good at staying wholly at the local level. It's just not how my mind works. I want to have as much impact as possible in as many ways as possible. So I do things at lots of different levels, and that's just what kind of works for me. But there isn't one right way to be an activist. You know, there are global campaigns that people can be part of and make a difference with: international, national, regional, local, and micro. You know, there is no one type of activism, that from the very local to the very global. It's about your interests, your passions, your resources, your time, your confidence, and where you want to put your energies. And none of those things are wrong. And you can, you know, do all of the above if you want to, and you've got the energy. It's really about whatever your community is. And sometimes your community might be not just your geographical community, it might be your professional community, your faith community, your school community. You know, there are lots of different communities that we're part of. So I think that's something that I went through an exercise of a couple of years ago, is mapping the communities that I was part of. And an obvious one for me was my professional community as a coach. So I took it upon myself to just start speaking out and influencing the coaching community internationally and beyond. And that's led to all sorts of things that I couldn't have predicted. So, you know, it's just doing stuff. We find out by doing it. And actually the risk, you know, you mentioned earlier on in the session about putting ourselves at risk. Actually, an awful lot of activism has no risk at all. The risk is in our minds. We fear judgment, we fear something's going to happen, but you speak up and you say something, and the biggest risk is you get ignored, frankly. And the most likely thing is some people go, do you know what, I've been thinking that, but I haven't been brave enough to say it. Thank you for saying it. That's the most likely outcome, and that is what I found most of the time. So there is very little risk to doing most of this stuff. Obviously, at the arrestable end, there's a bit of risk, but even that, for a lot of us, you know, if we're middle-aged and established, it's a lot less risky than if you're a young black guy who's going to have a different experience or whatever. But most activism is pretty low risk, and what we fear is judgment and being shunned by our tribe, but actually it doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we put number 3, discuss issues with your friends and family, because the chances are they're thinking the same, and you don't realise. Again, we seem to, not in our household, although my sisters hate it, we were brought up with debating round the table, you know, and that turns on and off. I know that as within our family. But there is nothing nicer, really, than taking a headline that you may have seen on the news or a snippet of information you may have read online, and then just discussing it with your friends and family to see what they are thinking. We've kind of stepped back from doing that as much as we should. And that's a shame, really. That creates a set of conversations that I think would give people much more confidence to think, oh gosh, you feel the same. Actually, there's this event going on. Would you like to go to that with me? And then you get that lovely moment where you realise you're not on your own and you're doing something together.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So number 4, we've got volunteer for something you believe in. There isn't a better time to be volunteering for things. I mean, I think the whole world is volunteering. Both me and Chris have volunteered for the stuff that's going on around the vaccine, and the St John's Ambulance, they were asked to take on 30,000 volunteers, which they thought was a milestone they probably couldn't reach, and they've had 50,000 applicants. It is just, so we are a nation that likes to get involved in stuff, and there is plenty on offer there. And the last one, learn something new. I mean, I've been putting myself through a period of learning, which is, you know, a very privileged thing to be able to do, but it's essential. It is really essential. You know, you don't stop learning when you finish school. In fact, for me, I started learning when I finished school. So it was completely the other way around. And the more informed we are, the better advocates we are. What we see and hear on the news now is not always correct. And that's a very difficult situation for us to understand and realise that we have to educate ourselves to make sure we can disseminate what we're being told.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree. Take the time to read other perspectives on what you're seeing in the news. Obviously not the conspiracy theorist type stuff, but you know, look, you know, even if it might be a weird thing to do, read some actual science. You know, when you see an article about something and there's a link to the science, or look up the actual science behind it. Don't just take the sort of superficial stuff that you're being told. Actually look it up, or do some research, or ask a scientist, or you know, actually find out a bit more about what's really happening socially and scientifically in the world. There's loads of people who can help you, and there's loads of websites and stuff that can help you, and find out about what's really going on, and then you'll be much more confident about speaking and acting.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are going to do nothing else, and oh my God, this one, I really this is within everybody's gift. Everyone, the power of the money you have in your pocket is activism as well. Activism where it hurts if you do it well. If you are making a decision to purchase something, you support inadvertently that organisation that stands behind what you are about to buy. And it's the easiest way, really, of maybe combining all the things that we've talked about, because if you do a little bit of research on whether the company that you're going to buy for is doing the right thing in your mind, is doing things that you can believe in, is looking after the future and making change, then brilliant. But if you continue to support industry that doesn't do all those things and doesn't pay people fairly and doesn't care about their impact to the environment, then you are also supporting that with your purchase. So
Yeah,
the easiest way.
absolutely. And I'd give a couple of plugs there and just extend that a little bit, Nina, because in terms of looking at who to avoid and who not to avoid when you're spending money, particularly on sizable expenditure, I really recommend people have a look at Ethical Consumer. They're absolutely brilliant. They are a staff-run co-op, not-for-profit kind of organisation. They're completely ethical, as they say they are on the tin. And they you can look up anything from banking to clothing to whatever on there, and they'll give you a really great view on who you should and shouldn't buy with. I think as well as spending now, Nina, it's all about saving. So where we save our money, where we invest our money, if we're in a position to make any savings or have any investments or pensions, depending on what age group we are and all that, actually moving that money around is really powerful, because a lot of people don't realise that an awful lot of banking and financial institutions are funding climate breakdown. They're funding fossil fuels, they're funding deforestation in the Amazon, they're funding really horrific human rights abuses, etc. So a couple of ones to absolutely avoid are Barclays and HSBC. So run a mile from Barclays and HSBC, and if you're with them, leave them and tell them why you're leaving them. There are much more ethical banking and financial institutions to be part of. So yeah, it's not just where you spend money; it's also where you save and invest. If you're lucky enough to be able to save and invest. And this week, actually, I spoke to my pension provider to say I want to understand how my pension can be invested ethically, and I didn't know what response I would get from that. But and actually, there was a little bit of, okay, yeah, we do have a fund. It wasn't what they were going to talk to me about, but I've asked them to send me all the information so that I understand what it is and I can look at it. And I am obviously not the first person to do that, because they have information that they could send. So I also would really support that. I think with all of these things, you think, oh, these are things you can't change. It will be too hard. They're sort of set in stone now. I've made my decision, but they're really not. And there are a lot of people out there, Zoe, like you, who are paving the way to make it easier for people like me just to jump on the back of that and say, there is something I can do. But it is the rest of us, it is me and everybody else who really does need, we really need to do that into support of all the brilliant work that people like you and others who have gone before you are doing to pave the way for us. So I hope everyone has taken some inspiration, some great tips. There will be lots of information in the podcast notes for this. And of course, if you are just listening, then take a look at the video so that you can see the slides that went along with it. I'm sure, Zoe, you would be open for, if anybody wants to get in touch, they can get in touch. You can put your details on there. You can take any questions people might have and direct them in ways if they want to start being a bit more curious. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Always happy to speak to people.
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure again. Thanks so much for taking part.
Thanks, Nina. Same, likewise.